Hey everybody, so today in this video I'm going to go over my opinion on the three main types of semi-auto handguns. Namely, you got single action only, traditional double action or double action single action, and striker fired. And to keep this as apples to apples as possible, I've got 3 guns in 45. All 3 guns have drop safeties on the firing pin, so kind of compare them that way. Of course, first up, I've got I'll show you, these are all clear, my Colt 1911. Got my Gen 2 Glock 21 and a HK USP 45, all clear. So going over these, all 3 of these are, common handguns in the market today. I mean, USP not so much, but talking about double action, single action, it's kind of a niche nowadays. Probably the least common. Most people either, let's face it, the striker fire guns dominate the market and the industry right now. Have for the past 15, 20 years really. Single action only 1911s, for example, kind of looked at as a FUD gun most of the time now, old people gun. And of course the double action single actions are kind of getting that way as well. They're kind of, like I said in another video, kind of a hipster gun. If you shoot one of these, you're kind of just doing it to be different. Well, maybe to an extent that's true, but there is value in that, in these guns. Coincidentally, all 3 of these types of guns, the Army did a test on in SOCOM back in the early GWAT days. Larry Vickers has talked about this, where they compared a GI standard issue World War II era 1911 to a SOCOM customized 1911, a Glock 21, and a USP 45. Coincidentally, if you were to compare, like, I don't have a GI style 1911, but if you were to compare, say this was like the Delta or the SOCOM version, they would be in reliability, from your left. The Glock 21 was actually the least reliable in their testing, than the 1911, and then the USP 45 was the most reliable. That really doesn't have anything to do with this video, just a little sidebar there. Talk real quick about each one of these guns. So the 1911 I've had the longest. Said in the other video about my 1911s, that this one I got probably 12 years ago or so. And I haven't had a malfunction out of this gun. I've only put probably 900 rounds through it, as near as I can recollect. But it's actually functioned 100%. The next gun that I got this gun about 6 years ago. It's a police trade-in Gen 2 Glock 21, dated back to I think 1992 if I remember right. It's got some serious wear in certain spots that aren't typical. You got some holster wear obviously, but it's like this spot right here, I don't know what happened there. This gun has probably had the most malfunctions out of any handgun I've ever owned. I say that being like the first, as soon as I got it, me and a buddy went to the range and shot it, and this gun would fail to feed, fail to go all the way in the battery, like every second or third round. And I fixed that. All it was the recoil spring was completely shot on it. I replaced the recoil spring assembly, and it's been pretty much 100% ever since. Aside from stippling it and adding a little grip tape to the top to help with racking, it's pretty much how I bought it. And aside from the recoil spring, no real issue there. I typically, if I'm going to go hunting in the woods, this is the gun I probably take because it was cheap and I really don't care about it. Of course, then the HK USP. My wife wanted an HK. She has a thing for HKs. Of course, I wasn't going to argue because USP 45. Always like the USPs as far as what they offer and their reliability. This is known. Plus, you know, it gives off those Tom Cruise, "Yo, homie, is that my briefcase" vibes. But anyway, so this is her carry gun. When she got this, she quit carrying a 1911 and started carrying this thing. Getting into the meat of the subject. Capacity aside, because you can get double stack single action only guns. Capacity can be really subjective because based on the gun models and calibers, there's options on double action, single action, and striker. They kind of all equal out. One of the things, I guess, of course, you know, single action only, especially in the 1911, it is the gold standard on the trigger. It's kind of scary to people nowadays, I guess, because you see a hammer cocked. But I mean, as I've talked about in other videos, it's not gonna go off like this. You can disengage the safety, and you can press the trigger as hard as you want. It's not going to go off unless you engage the grip safety. Likewise, you can squeeze grip safety all you want, and as long as the thumb safety is engaged, it's not going off. Likewise, people, I mean, so in comparison, you know, not so much with Glocks, but with a lot of striker fire guns now, they're pretty much single action only guns. The strikers on them are all the way tensioned, almost all the way to where all you're doing when you move the trigger is dropping the sear. Not really with Glocks, but some of the newer ones that have these 1911 like triggers, that's the case. With these, it's simple. You know, there's no safety to play with. You just got the trigger, and that's all there is to it, you know. With double action, single action guns, some of them have safeties, some of them have decockers, some of them, you know, have both. This, you know, HK has a decocker and a safety. You can carry it double action on safe. You can carry it double action without the safety, which is what I would recommend. Or, in this case, you can carry it cocked and locked like a 1911 with the safety on and then hammer cock. And it has a decocker, like I just showed. And safety, decock, see, safe. Can't do anything with it, but so. I'm a big fan of double actions. I think they're the way to go on a lot of cases because you got a heavier weight, not necessarily like this gun, the trigger hammer, the double action on this is probably 10 to 12 pounds, but you can get them down to like 6, like my Elite LTT. But it's the distance you have to pull the trigger that keeps you out of trouble, because you can start engaging, and if you decide you don't need to be shooting, you just let off, and you're back to normal. One thing about double actions, You know, they do give you a lot of feedback as you're rolling the trigger back. So if you give a slow, steady pull, it usually doesn't move, or doesn't move a lot. Some of the other, which allows you to be more aggressive on the trigger while you're presenting to the target. With a striker fire or a single action only, you really need to have your sights aligned on target before you squeeze. You know, you can take up the slack a little bit, but you know, you really need to have the gun lined up before you commit to the trigger. Same thing with the Glock. There is more travel with trigger, like stock Glock triggers, but it's not much. Hang on a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so pros and cons to each one. As I said, if I had to go safe wise, I don't think anybody could argue that this isn't the safest design, the double action, single action. Just because of that you have to move the trigger so much, and typically they're heavier triggers. A lot of people say that they're kind of that first round's a automatic miss. Well, not if you actually train. That is the downside of these, is you actually have to become proficient at trigger control, which people say they are with other guns, such as a single action only or a striker fire gun, which are the most prevalent. But then you give them a trigger like this and they yank the first round, and they just say it's crappy. Well, it's perfectly fine if you actually learn how to control the trigger right. And when you become good at one of these, as I said in another video, striker guns, 1911s, single action onlys, everything else becomes easier. Probably why these are my preferred type of guns to carry. Also, I prefer hammer fire guns because drawing and holstering, you can control the hammer and basically make the gun unable to do anything. Where, probably the most dangerous part of manipulating a gun is holstering, and when things can get in the way. And if you have your hand on the trigger, you break a finger before you can actually make the gun go off. Single action only guns, you can do the same thing. You grab the claw, even if I did this, you'd feel it and it wouldn't go. See, I managed to get it to disengage, but see, like that, it's pressed against my thumb. If that ever happened, now it's at half cock. At least it wouldn't be a round going off on you. Unfortunately, with striker guns, unless you get like whatever they call it, the Glock gadget or whatever, one of those where you press against the back plate and it disengages the tensioner, or it pushes against the striker. There's something the only mechanical safety in the gun that's external is on the trigger, and if something gets in the trigger guard when you're holstering or whatever, it's going to go off. Lots of people have carried striker guns for the last almost 30 years now, and I mean they've considered safe, but that is something to consider. Downside also to these, generally you have the worst triggers possible. Aside from this one, the double action on these USPs is just, they are atrocious. as far as they go. If I had my SIGs or my Berettas out here, it'd be a better comparison. But these are probably the double action part is probably the worst trigger out there on that I could think of. If you wanted to, you could carry this thing cocked and locked though, and the single action on these is actually not bad. It has a little bit of movement, but it's still far better than a Glock trigger or a striker trigger. Let's see what else. 1911. I mean, like I said, obviously best trigger there is. This is probably the worst 1911 trigger I've ever had in this Series 80 gun. But you know, it's still like the worst 1911 trigger, better than just about everything else anyway, no matter what. And that's pretty much that. So talking about, you know, simplicity, yeah, these guns, the striker guns are usually the most simple. If you take a look at a 1911, there's a lot of small pieces. You're not gonna, unless you know what you're doing or have done it before. It takes a while to tear apart the frame of a 1911 and do it right and put it back together where it actually works. This HK, for example, or Beretta or SIG, they are pretty complicated as far as, unless you know what you've done it a few times or you know what you're doing. They're, disassembly, or not disassembly, but tearing it apart to clean it completely is takes a while. Glock, if you got the Glock 332nd punch, you could take one of these completely apart about 5 minutes at most, and with relative ease get it back together and functioning again. Yeah, so I've carried all three designs over the years, put lots of rounds through different ones, and at the end of the day, it's, I prefer double action only gun, or double action single action guns, and then I would take a 1911. I do not think that the safety is a hindrance. If you grip the gun right coming out of the holster, the like a claw grip, when you come down, it just puts your thumb right there on the safety. The same with this one. If you did that, you could disengage the safety if you had it on safe. Or even with a Beretta, like I showed in another video, when you come down the same motion, it clicks the safety off. So I don't really see that safeties are a hindrance. If people say, oh, you won't be able to remember that. That's a crock, because you can line up the sights. You can be expected to line up the sights with a target, which is exponentially more difficult under stress, and you can manipulate a trigger without moving a gun, but you can't do this. And you can hit this button to release a magazine or hit the slide stop, but the safety or decocker is too hard. Sorry, not buying it. Like this one is pretty cool. I do like how the decocker and the safety are right there, so you just, and it really, when I first started shooting this thing, I kind of figured the way, riding it like a 1911, it would decock periodically, but it doesn't. It's got enough tension on it that it doesn't do that. That being said, striker fire guns have their place. If you have personnel that, or people that you can't, they couldn't be trained properly on how to control a gun, it makes sense to give them something that is simple. I would still venture to say that having a gun with a safety or a longer trigger pull is safer, but if you can't afford, can't take the time to train on how to properly do a double action trigger or how to manipulate a thumb safety, these are the way to go. They're tough, you don't have to maintain them as much. All guns need lubrication and spring replacement and whatnot, but it's a tough gun. I would venture to say that the HK is tougher, but that's not talking about this. It's just talking about the brands. And at the end of the day, if you told me I had to take one of these three, in particular one of these three guns, and you picked them and just said, here, go, I wouldn't, I'd just go with it. It's not the tool, it's the craftsman. You get, you gave me this Glock 21 from 1992 with plenty of mags and ammo. I'd rock with it. Same thing with this HK, even though the double action's atrocious on this thing. I would still roll with it. Even though the double action is pretty bad on this, it's still, easy enough to get hits with it. And once you get to the single action mode, the trigger is actually really good compared to, say, Glock. 1911, best trigger there is. Safety, not a problem for me. Capacity, so that's the downside to a single stack. Not really part of this argument, but with the typical single action only guns are usually 1911s or high power. Now there's a high power back out there, but capacity's lower. One of the things about 1911s, you need to know how to reload. In a personal defense shooting, is that really even going to be necessary? Who knows? But it's something when you practice with a 1911, you reload a lot. So you get good at it. It is more difficult because unlike the HK, any double stack gun, you have a lot bigger hole to get a magazine in versus 1911. This one doesn't even have a mag well. It does have a little bit of a bevel, but sliding mags in it's not as easy, versus say this HK, or even the Glock. This is, I'm actually not a fan of how Glock reloads go because the magazines, being polymer on the outside, they seem to drag. But anyway, at the end of the day, it's not the tool, it's the craftsman. Stick with what you got and learn how to shoot it. So until next time, I'll talk to y'all later.